Hey, what's up? This is Scott with Level Up Tutorials, and in this video, we're going to be talking about events and methods within Vue. Now, we're going to be using an event to trigger a method and to actually start to get a little bit more interactive with our code here. So let's get going on that right now. Okay, so in the last video, we talked a little bit about directives and sort of what that means. And if you see something with a V hyphen, that means it's a directive. Basically, it allows us to interact with our HTML, and the V hyphen lets Vue know that something is up, right? That it lets it know that it needs to do something. So in this video, we're going to be talking about this last directive that we mentioned very briefly in the last video, which was on click. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. You can see we have V hyphen on colon click. And now on click, this is going to do something. Now, if we wanted this to actually modify the data property, such as is true, we could actually do that in here as a string in a JavaScript expression, which sounds sort of weird. So first thing we're going to do is do exactly that. We're going to say is true is equal to exclamation point is true. And you're going to see our first little bit of dynamic code working here. When we're doing an on click of this button, it's going to evaluate the statement setting is true to the opposite of the current is true. We should be able to see the hello world come and go here as we press our button. We press it and hello world either shows up or it doesn't. So this is some of the cool things we can do with on click here. And there's all sorts of other different on properties. Now with vOn, we have access to all different types of JavaScript events, from things like click to submit to key up, all that kind of stuff that you'd be used to in normal JavaScript. So you can see this on click is going to evaluate this statement. However, this isn't primarily how you're going to be doing this kind of thing. We're primarily going to actually be using this kind of event inside of a method, right? When we do something like an interaction, maybe we want a function somewhere or a method somewhere that can handle what it's supposed to be doing for us. Now, this is an extremely simple statement, so obviously throwing this in here to show and hide this, well, it's fine. But it might clutter up your code before you know it. So one of the things we can do is break this out into a method onto our Vue instance. So we can come in here to our data, just below our data, and have a new comma. And this is going to be our very first method, something that we're going to be using quite a bit. So we could say methods, and the method is going to be a colon and then another object. Inside of this object is going to be a property of the name of our method. So we're going to say toggle is true is the name of the method. Now we're going to have a colon, and then we're going to have the word function. Now we need the word function here instead of doing an arrow function so that Vue correctly uses this. If you don't know the difference between a function and an arrow function and how it handles this, you might want to do some research about that. In this, we're basically saying, hey, we want to refer to this Vue instance itself, so therefore this is going to be talking about this particular one. If we use an arrow function, that will break that functionality. Now, one of the things we can do here is actually have access to the data that we have inside of our component. For instance, we have is true and hello. Now we want to access the data using the this keyword. So to do that, we just say this dot is true. And we can assign or modify this variable directly in here. For instance, we can say this is true is equal to exclamation point this is true. And you might be saying, hey, this is more work than this. And that's very true, but this method can be reused. It's obviously more code. It's going to take some of this code out of your template here, and it's going to make things a little bit more organized. Not to mention, methods can be quite a bit more complex than simply just toggling a value. So now, instead of saying is true is equal to is true in here, we can actually get rid of this whole thing in our onClick and actually just type in the name of our method itself, which is toggle is true. And we should see the exact same thing happening that we did when we had the expression directly inside of our onClick. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave this one in the code here, and I'm going to paste this in here. I'm going to comment this one out, and I'm going to have our toggle is true in here, just so you can have both of these in the code examples. Okay, so we have toggle is true. Now when I press this, you can see the exact same thing happens. Hello world is showing and hiding. So what we've learned here is that, well, to access things inside of our Vue instance or in our component, it's not just the data that we have access to. We also have access to things inside of methods. For instance, toggle is true did not have to be defined in any sort of methods.toggle is true. Vue just sort of knew toggle is true is this method right here. Now again, we need to use a function here because we need to access the correct version of this. Now this.isTrue is directly referencing this data is true. Now we can again set and modify this property by saying this is true is equal to the opposite of what it currently is, okay? And so this is your basic first method. If we wanted to add in more methods, you would simply have a comma, method name, function, and we could even have events passed in here. This is something that we're going to go over quite a bit more, but you could have as many methods as you wanted in your component, and these things can do all sorts of stuff from hitting an API to computing specific properties. It can do all sorts of stuff. And now we don't actually just have to use methods inside of event handlers, right? Like an onClick. Like let's come up top here where we have our hello. We can have this now be method name, right? Let's actually output the results of method name. And this method is simply just going to return a string that says from the method. Okay? And check this out, we are getting a function output in our code. What happening is here is this method name is actually referring to the method, and it's going to output, well, not what we want. But that doesn't mean that all hope is lost here, because we can still do this exact same thing. We simply just need to have parentheses at the end of this method name to run this like a function. So we're going to say, hey, method name, and now we can say hello world from the method, okay? And again, from the method is coming directly from this method, and it's just whatever this thing is returning. Again, remember so far everything inside of here is just an object. We have our element where it's attaching, we have our data that is coming in here, and we have our now methods, which allows us to have some functionality inside of our code. Now again, there's more things that we can add inside of this object that we're going to go over as we go, but this should give you a basic idea of what's what in Vue. You've gotten a little bit of the templating language here. We've gotten some directives with arguments, and we have done some interaction now. So the last thing I want to do before we move on to the Vue CLI is handle some input and some data with something called Vue model, okay? And this is going to be sort of the Angular 1 famous two-way data binding example. We're going to show you how nice and easy it is to handle user input and assign that to some data. So as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. If you'd like to purchase this entire series, head on over to leveluptutorials.com/store and purchase Vue for everyone. Or you can become a Level Up Pro and get access to not only Vue for everyone, but a ton of other premium tutorial series, such as Pro Gatsby or Modern CSS Layouts. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.